Good evening. I'm going to kick off the November 5th Bothell Shorelines Board meeting. I'm senior planner Dave Boyd with the City of Seattle, and until we do elections, I'll get the meeting underway. I think before we start, let's just do a quick round of introductions, since this is the first official meeting of the board, and we'll start with our consultant.
Hi, my name is Amy Sumi. I'm a biologist and environmental planner with Shannon & Wilson, and I'm on the consultant team.
As I said, I'm Dave Boyd. The protocol, since some of you are new with these mics, is you have to hit the button and turn the red light on for it to activate your mic, and then when you're not speaking, it's best to turn it off just so it doesn't pick up paper rustling and that sort of thing. So,
I'm Mike Cotterman. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Bothell.
My name's Ryan Page. I work for the City of Bothell Parks and Rec Department.
Oh.
Anne Gard.
Dave Cox.
Dave Bain.
Patrick Ewing.
Jim Orr.
We don't have any other public here, so there will no non-agenda public comments and no minutes, since this is the first meeting of the reformed Shorelines Board. So the first item of new business is election of officers. So you've all had our orientation session to get to know each other a bit, and so per the current bylaws, the board elects a chair, a deputy chair, and an executive secretary. With that, unless there's any questions or comments, I would open it up for nominations for the chair position.
I guess with our most recent government experience, I would nominate Patrick Ewing as chair.
Second.
And I accept the nomination. I'd like to nominate Anne Agard as chair.
Is there a second?
I'm going to respectively decline because I think Pat would make a wonderful chair. Thank you, though, David.
I'll second anyway.
But you're still declining even with the second? So.
You're fine. I'm fine, yeah.
Okay. Any other nominations? Okay. Let's go ahead and take a vote. All in favor of Patrick Ewing for chair?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous. And with that, are you prepared to take it from there?
All right, so now we'll open up nominations for the deputy chair.
I nominate Jim Orr as deputy chair.
Just because I seconded you?
I second that nomination.
I accept, I guess. I accept.
Is there any other nominations for deputy chair? All right, seeing none, the nominee for deputy chair is Jim Orr. Any discussion? All right, if you'd cast your votes by saying aye or nay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimous. So our new deputy chair will be Jim Orr. Now I'll open up nominations for executive secretary.
I have a clarification question. I thought that we did not have an executive secretary, and now it's on here.
The bylaws, per the bylaws, there is an executive secretary. The bylaws currently call for the executive secretary to take minutes. We are not doing that. Staff has done that, taken over that job for all of the boards. So you could choose to eliminate that position, but what I've suggested in the minutes is that we keep that position. That way, in the case there's a meeting where both the chair and the deputy chair can't make it, then the remaining board members don't have to elect somebody to be chair pro tem. You have a third backup.
I guess I had the same question looking at it. It seems we eliminated all duties except being the third backup.
Yeah.
But even if
essentially.
that person is gone, there was still the step of, well, then whoever's left would just nominate a pro term.
Well, and to be exact, we haven't approved the bylaw
That's
changes,
correct.
so we don't know
That's true.
exactly where the discussion is going.
Fair
Maybe
enough.
the executive secretary will have other duties than just to be the third backup.
So without a bylaw change, it is a position.
Okay, so nominations for executive secretary.
I nominate Ann Agar for executive secretary.
Second?
I accept.
Okay, are there any other nominations for executive secretary? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously.
Okay,
All
excellent.
right. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is amendment of bylaws. So Dave, why don't you give us a presentation and then we can have some discussion.
Okay, I'll just walk you through page by page here. This is attachment 1. On the first page, we've changed the location to the City Hall. I've added that officers can be nominated at the first board meeting in May or the first regular or special meeting following City Council appointment. This is technically a special meeting tonight because it's not on the regular meeting night. And then in section 5, we've changed from the chair supervising preparation of the agenda that will coordinate with staff on preparation of the agenda. And moving on to the second page, and feel free to jump in with any questions or comments as we go. Under 5C, at the top of page 2, is the changes for the executive secretary. Again, removing the responsibility for keeping the minutes. So as we just discussed, the executive secretary's real only function is the third backup to the chair and the deputy chair. Then under Article 5, meetings, I made the changes to go with the second Monday of each month at 6 p.m. Here in City Hall. And then allowing for a majority of the board to approve an alternate meeting date. And below under Article 5, Section 5, I've altered the order of the agenda to reflect what the other boards are operating under. And that's how I've organized the agenda for tonight. Basically, trying to think, substantive change here. It's really just a reordering of the agenda. On the top of page 3, Article 5, Section 5C, there used to be a 5-minute recess after 1.5 hours because we recorded the tapes on 90-minute tapes. So that is no longer necessary. I've put in here, it used to say that the board meeting shall end by 10, starting at 7. I've changed that to 9. I think we'll probably strive to not go 3 hours, but if we do, or if we have to go beyond 3 hours, the board needs to take a majority vote to do that. Article 6 are the public hearing procedures. Those are altered slightly, and they're, for the most part, there's a lot reference to applicants, and that goes back to the time when the Shoreline Board acted as a quasi-judicial board and actually heard applications for permits, shoreline permits. And I was actually going to eliminate all that, but there is a possibility that, or there could be a possibility, probably not now, that there would be an applicant for a shoreline master program code amendment, comp plan amendment, and if council approved the board looking at other comp plan amendments, this would apply. So just a few minor changes there. And then at the end, previously, and this was common of other boards, all the board members signed the approved bylaws, and with the other boards, we simplified that to just let the chair sign it. So that was the proposal here. And at this point, we would fill in Patrick Ewing's name as the chair. So any questions or other comments or suggestions?
Wholly editorial, on the first page, if we're striking Bothell from the title of Bothell Shorelines Board, and then on the first line under Article 1, the City of Bothell, Washington, Bothell Shorelines Board, do we also want to strike it there, the second Bothell?
Yeah, good catch. I totally missed that one. I would be inclined to strike the comma, the Washington, and the Bothell, and the second Bothell myself, the City of Bothell Shorelines Board.
Yeah, agreed. Missing a end quotation as well.
Okay.
We found our secretary here. Any other questions of staff? I did have a couple of questions. So, sometimes I have the theory, if it's not broken, why fix it? So with the rewording, what was the problem with the wording of supervise versus coordinate with? Because in some way, the reason why I ask is citizen boards are important in that, the citizens get to weigh in and make the final decision. And so was there a problem with the word supervise previously that, with this board, we were only meeting for several meetings and then it's, all over. So I don't envision any problems, but
I think, yeah.
because should the chair be getting together with staff before the meeting and going over the agenda and making sure we're in agreement on the agenda, or is it we just show up at the meeting and staff brings everything to our plate? So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
The change was basically to reflect how we work with other boards, that staff basically drafts an agenda, runs it by the chair for approval, and particularly in this case where we're working closely with the consultants, the contact between the city and the consultants is through the staff lead. So that it was basically just to reflect how we've been staffing boards. So I don't have any particular issue with leaving it the language as it was, but that was the idea.
Okay. And then the duties of the secretary. So would there be any benefit to have the secretary, review the minutes before, the secretary do take their own handwritten notes and compare them with the official before the meeting so that we don't have to take that time during the meeting? Would that be something we would think would work, or we are going to be just completely reliant upon staff bringing us the minutes and having to review them during the meeting time?
Well, you shouldn't be having to review them during the meeting. They would come in the packet, so you should have plenty of time to review and be prepared with any changes. Also, the minutes are we haven't been doing detailed minutes of boards. They're pretty basic. But I wouldn't have an objection to giving the executive secretary the duty of doing a first review of the minutes, if that was your preference.
And then I found it interesting that on the city council, the chair can't make a motion, but they can second. So what is the rationale that the board would have different rules than the city council would?
So
This is on page 1, under section 5, duties of officers. It says the chair is a full voting member of the board and participate in its activities with the exception of making and seconding motions.
and you're saying that on council, the mayor can second?
Correct. He can't make it a motion, but and I don't see this becoming an issue either, but I just found it interesting.
Yeah.
So you would strike the second.
If we wanted to be consistent with council, we would do that, yeah.
I think particularly with a small board like this, that's fine to strike that.
Okay, so is there well, I guess let's ask questions first, and then we can take actions later.
And just to clarify, striking what specifically? Just the making of the motion? Or I'm sorry, the
We would
second?
strike and seconding.
It's the second, we'd strike the second.
Okay, so you could second the motion but not
You
make
can
a
second
motion.
a motion.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, no, you would actually strike making and, so it says that the chair will participate fully in its activities with the exception of making, I'm sorry, making motions, yes, making, so you'd strike and seconding.
Correct.
Are there other questions for staff? Okay, so I think we have in front of us a couple of proposed changes. We'll just go through them. We're striking on the first paragraph, this Washington Bothell, and we're adding a quotation mark at the end. And I think it might be easiest, if there's any opposition, just say it now, and we can have a discussion on them one at a time instead of having to try to do it in a motion. And then the second change that's been proposed is to, in section 5, duties of officers, to strike the words and seconding in regards to the chair making motions. Are there any other proposed changes to what staff has proposed?
What was your opinion on the supervise versus coordinate with the staff?
I think it probably doesn't make any difference. I think the interaction is going to be the same, that, you know, I will be in contact with staff before the meeting just to make sure we're on the same page. And I don't think I need to supervise. I think I can coordinate with.
So Ann, I'd like your opinion on the duties of the executive secretary, if you have them.
Yeah, well, you hadn't really talked about changing any wording there. Do you still have some wording on that second page you would like to specifically propose?
I don't know how others feel. I just put that out there as, would there be any value to have the, you know, the secretary do a review before the meeting? You have a little bit more responsibility on one person to take that to
I'm
heart.
happy to review. I must say, I'm not the best note taker in the world. David is sitting here taking really good notes. But I think I will certainly, I think I've got a pretty good memory, so, and I could, however you want to word it. But I would not take detailed notes.
And
So,
I don't think you would need to. I mean, my
Just say
experience,
we just-
the notes have been pretty high level.
Oh, yeah, that usually, yeah.
I'm fine with it either way. I don't think we had many corrections to the notes in the past.
Yeah.
So what, the language that said that the secretary shall certify, what did that mean? What did the secretary, how did the secretary certify them? Because I don't know that we want to keep that wording.
We used to have secretaries of boards, and I don't remember if the bylaws use the word certify, but they signed the minutes after the board approved them. We've eliminated that from our general practice because, so that we can, as soon as the board approves the minutes. So the process before was, if there were any changes, then our admin staff would make those changes, print out a copy, let the secretary know that it was there to sign, and then a day or a week or however long later, they would get signed, and we couldn't post them until then. And we just wanted to streamline the process to posting the minutes. So we eliminated the need to sign.
So how about if we just borrow the same language from the chair's duties, that the executive secretary shall coordinate with staff on the preparation of the minutes? Would that work?
That's good.
Or since we're not really, at least we're not asking the executive secretary to help prepare them, but we could say in that first statement, shall be responsible for reviewing the minutes of all meetings of the board. I think that would be adequate. You all review them, but so if you wanted to review the meetings of the minutes of all meetings of the board prior to distribution to the rest of the board, that would be.
I want to just confirm, our minutes are being taped, so I could go back to the tape and watch that to confirm.
If you really, if you really had some issues about whether we got it right, yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like it might be the most useful thing, which I don't foresee coming up much, but if we were to have changes to the minutes, if we made some changes during the following meeting, there would be a good role to be, well, the city went and revised it, and then you could look at it, did that capture our changes?
Yeah, that's,
That makes sense. So how do we,
word that?
yeah,
Well, that's kind of that certification concept, right?
How about the secretary shall approve all board changes to the minutes prior to release by the staff?
I almost think if we just kept the deletion of the first sentence, but added back in and kept the final ones, that would capture, I think, what we're saying here. You're not responsible for keeping the detailed minutes, but you will certify them once, assist or work with the city to prepare them and certify them at the end.
I think that
That would work. I was starting to draft a change to the first sentence that would say the executive secretary shall be responsible for reviewing the minutes prior to the distribution to the full board and following any changes made at the board meeting.
I like that.
I think we're trying to avoid a second signature that could delay the process, so
Right.
that's why we're trying to avoid the word certified, but I think review is sufficient.
So Dave, are you happy with that? If so, could you read it one more time?
Yeah. So the first sentence would read, the executive secretary shall be responsible for reviewing the minutes of all meetings of the board prior to distribution to the full board and following any changes, period.
Does anybody have any further tweaking of that? Okay. Any other changes proposed? nobody's going to have hurt feelings if I get to be the only one signing the bylaws. Okay. All right. Let's give everybody just one more chance to just make sure they don't see anything else they want to have changed. So Dave, are we taking action on these tonight then?
Yeah, I would like, it'd be appropriate to take a motion and vote on the changes.
Okay. Does anybody want me to go back and read through the changes again, or are we all comfortable? I think we kind of, okay, yes, so we will need a motion.
I move we adopt the bylaws as amended.
Second.
We've got a motion by David Bain, second by Jim Orr to approve the City of Bothell Shorelines Board bylaws and rules of procedure as amended. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, if all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Passes unanimously. And then I will return the floor to Dave to take us to the next
All right.
item.
Thank you very much. So there is no public hearing tonight, so we'll move directly into study session. I have the packet up on the screen, and you have hard copies in front of you. The screen will probably be mostly for any viewers of the video. So with that, the bulk of the material that's been presented tonight is from the consultants. So I'm going to let Amy walk you through most of this. I did include, after looking, we had talked about at the last meeting, I distributed a hard copy of the Shoreline Master Program, the comp plan portion of the shoreline, the policies, goals, and actions. And we had talked about distributing the hard copy of the shoreline development regulations, chapter 13. It's 270 pages, so we decided that for this first meeting, rather than dumping the entire 270 pages on you, first we thought it'd be good to have some discussion about whether you felt it was necessary to have a hard copy of that whole 270 pages, or if we could revert to the online. It is available online in the Bothell Municipal Code, and then bring the sections that we are amending to you as we discuss them. So I will open that up for some feedback that would be useful.
Well, I'm very old-fashioned. I like to read paper. And I actually have a copy of the almost final draft from the current Shoreline Master Program. So for me personally, I would really appreciate having the final version, complete version, and I would use it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think if I was looking at it electronically, I would intend to just print out the pieces that I intended to speak about, or if I had questions on something, but then I wouldn't have the benefit if another member of the board brought up a question on a section that I didn't have in front of me. So if there's a potential for something to be discussed at in a meeting, it would be good to have it ahead of time.
Yeah, I think same for me.
Okay. Well, then we will at the next meeting have a full version printed out. As I was going through it, I was trying to do some edits to try to make it a little more readable and maybe reduce the bulk of it. So maybe I can get it down a little less than 270, but at that size, it'll probably make sense to just give you each a binder with the full development regulations.
So alternatively, because, you know, on council, we got stacks and stacks of paper, it became much easier, you know, over time, once we had our own computers to use the computer versions, but we don't have the computers that the council has, so I think paper is probably what we're gonna have to use unless we came to agreement that everybody's gonna bring their computer and use it here at the meeting.
And I'm not sure that would pass muster with our IT folks to have people bring their own computers. So I thought you were going to suggest that we could request that all the board members get computers, but
Yeah.
so yeah, we'll go with hard copy. But for tonight, we do have Chapter 1307, which has the shoreline environment designations, and we included that because there are a couple of issues related to the designation and the mapping in a couple of areas, and we have copies of those, and maybe this would be a good time to go ahead and distribute those. I can just pass them down. How many did you make? 10. Okay, there's enough for everybody. So the main purpose, like I said, for including this is to talk about, well, really the one area where we're talking about changing the designation, which is along in the former Wayne Golf Course back 9, which on the south side of the river is split. The 200-foot shoreline jurisdiction is split between urban conservancy along the river and shoreline residential in the outer 100 feet of the 200-foot designation. And so since this has now been purchased by the city for permanent open space, we are looking at making an appropriate change to the designation there. Most likely to urban conservancy, but the one area that we do want to make sure that we're not, there's a portion of that outer 100 feet that extends onto the 5 acres that's being, that the city hasn't purchased yet. It's still being held by Forterra. The intent is to purchase that, and that 5 acres will have fewer restrictions on the use. So it could be used for active recreation and potentially other income-producing uses. So we want to make sure that we're not going to hamstring the ability to do those sorts of things. But it's a very small sliver of that 5 acre that's within the 200-foot shoreline jurisdiction. So we're not making any decisions or recommendations tonight. It was just an opportunity to have some discussion and introduce that topic. And Amy, did you have anything more you wanted to add on that one?
Not on that one specifically, just to make sure everybody's looking at the right side. It's probably pretty obvious, but the side that shows the yellow area is right now, as you said, shoreline residential, and the orange kind of polygon is urban conservancy. And I think the area that you were talking might be the sliver for high intensity, or some other sort of more intense uses on this west edge there.
Yeah, just west of just west of 96th, which is the bright yellow, or actually it's Waynita Way in that section.
Yeah, okay. And so options, there's a couple options maybe for more high intensity planned uses in that area. It'd be, depending on what you're planning to do, it could be high intensity park. So we kind of split the difference between high intensity, which is typically commercial and those types of uses, but then also recognizing that in Bothell, you've got some pretty intense use of park areas. And then there's also the urban conservancy, which is the more traditional, a lot more open space, passive recreation, that sort of thing. And then we also have there's no high intensity, there's just plain high intensity and then high intensity park. So those are probably the 3 different things that you'd want to think about. Maybe urban conservancy does work, and we'd want to look carefully at the actual use matrix. And if you're familiar with the use matrices, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the SMP, but it just identifies for each environment designation category what uses are allowed and with what permit type. So like in a park environment, a 7-Eleven is probably going to be a prohibited use. But in a high-intensity environment, it's probably going to be either, depending on where it is, maybe conditional or just permitted outright. So those are the types of things you want to think about when figuring out how to assign an environment designation. The chapter that was passed out to you includes for each of the environment designation possibilities, the purpose and the management policies. And those are largely set kind of by State Department of Ecology, their preliminary preference for how to divvy up those different areas. But there is some flexibility in there, and where it was appropriate, we made some modifications so it fit better with Bothell's existing conditions. For example, Department of Ecology does not have anything called high-intensity park. It also doesn't have a marina designation, which I don't think we'll get into on this board, but that's just one example of how we've kind of customized the designations to really fit local conditions. And this is not one of those items that's on the ecology mandated, you must review this checklist and make these changes or consider them. This is sort of the off to the side, hey, we should think about this while we're in the midst of doing our periodic and required update of the Shoreline Master Program, so.
Although they did say to address any changed circumstances. So
Yeah.
the acquisition of the Wayne Golf Course is certainly a changed circumstance in this regard. One other thing I wanted to let you know that we have started the discussion with the Parks Department about what their plans are and what the other restrictions are for the 5 acres and the rest of the Wayne property. So that dialogue is going on as well, and they'll be involved in any and have a chance to weigh in on any final decisions for this piece.
So would it be appropriate to ask questions as we go along, or did you want to finish the
Yeah,
presentation?
no, I think as we go.
Yeah.
'Cause I see several people waiting to chime in, so who wants to go first? Let's start this way. Ann, get your light on.
I have a couple of questions. One is, last time we talked a little bit about Waynita Creek and where it comes in. And is that shown on this map here? Because I think that's important also, because it will carry, I mean, it will go a little ways up Waynita Creek because of the way your shoreline jurisdiction goes, so.
It may.
It may,
yeah.
it not necessarily, but it can. So I wondered if you could identify that.
It doesn't really show on the map that you've got, but I'm going to try to pull up a more detailed map here. On the screen right now, I've got a bigger map that also doesn't clearly show it, but I did want to point out that
Okay.
high-intensity park uses are the designation at the park at Bothell Landing currently,
could read
and
it
along
there.
and it's a little bit it looks like it's all red going along there, but this is actually high intensity.
Part, or
No,
No,
park
that's-
ends and then it turns to what's the other high intensity use?
light intensity.
Just high intensity.
Yep.
Yeah. So that covers some of the industrial uses east of the park. But again, we're looking down here, and I'm going to try to navigate while you go on discussing to a more detailed map and that shows Waynita Creek.
And I think someone just pointed it out to you, you can kind of make out where it is just by looking at the vegetation. There seems to be
David kind of could show where some vegetation is, but it really is not clear, but I think that's important to know also.
Yeah.
Because that, yeah.
Yeah, and as you were kind of referencing how far the ordinary high water mark of the river goes up and how that might influence jurisdiction, was that one of your
Yeah, that's
kind of
right. 'Cause
concerns?
I believe, but I could be wrong, that whatever that shoreline jurisdiction is, it carries onto that creek.
Yes, so the creek will pass through shoreline jurisdiction. It is subject to the
Yeah.
Shoreline Master Program.
Absolutely.
And has buffers and that sort
Yeah,
of
so
thing.
the point is, whatever that shoreline jurisdiction is for the Sammamish will also be the shoreline jurisdiction. Normally, it would not, because Waikiki is not a shoreline
Right,
of the
yeah,
state.
and it still is not a
It
shoreline
is
water
still is not,
body.
but
It's
it's-
just in jurisdiction and will be governed by the regulations in the master program.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But it wouldn't get its own buffer because it's in the creek, and it wouldn't go beyond that 200-foot, up the
Right,
creek.
right. Yes, it
No.
will still have the buffer required for whatever type stream it is that we've established within the Shoreline Master Program regulations for that type of stream.
okay, now you're. And then I assume the blue is wetlands there?
Yeah.
The
Looks like-
blue that you see here is the Sammamish River. These areas, blue and green crosshatch, are wetland areas.
And in this instance then, looking at that there, the shoreline jurisdiction technically would encompass the wetland that, as it extends outside of what we currently show, that yellow area. So the wetland would be part of shoreline jurisdiction as well.
Yes, that
Not
would
its
definitely
buffer
be an
though, but just
associated
the
wetland.
wetland. Right.
And then if the ordinary high water for the river extended into Wainita Creek, there might be a bump out, but that probably would have been mapped
Yeah. I
previously.
don't-
But we can
right.
double check that.
Right.
I think maybe I see well, I can't tell for sure.
See if going in, here we go. And the 5 acres that I've talked about is this parcel here.
So would you show the 5 acres again, where that line is?
Should be able to,
Okay, so
Highlight
it
it here.
goes,
there you go. The yellow polygon here.
yeah. Next time we're together, is it possible that you could bring us a map that shows that on it and so forth,
Yes.
so we could look at it and
Yep.
that maybe even has some of the wetlands and such?
I could certainly bring copies of this when we're having the detailed discussion of that.
Are there any other questions?
If you have trails, what kind of use status does that need to have?
It depends on what kind of trail it is, but generally speaking, in urban conservancy, residential, high intensity, all of those designations are pretty trail friendly. So I think there's some regulations that govern materials and that they be narrow as feasible. I think there's some specific dimensional standards related to whether or not they might be part of a regional trail system. So the Shoreline Master Program in general and Shoreline Management Act in general is friendly to things that facilitate public access and passive recreation and those types of water enjoyment, water-oriented kind of uses.
Okay, but trails would not be consistent with natural.
They can be, we have to see what our matrix said. If in a natural system, you might do not pervious, impervious. Yes,
Not
you'd use
impervious.
pervious surfaces. It'd probably be minimal widths. If you were in any wetland areas, which most of the natural designation are wetlands, then it would need to be boardwalks and those types of things. So yeah, it's, let me see. I think
What
the
about
use
it?
matrix.
What about additional access or, like parking or bike?
Yeah, it depends on the use, but if it's parking that's accessory to or supports the public park or recreation, those types of water-oriented access, then it would be allowed. A park and ride would not be something that would be preferred in shoreline jurisdiction in general.
Agreed, but I just have a problem with a park where kids have to walk across the street to get to it.
Right.
so.
Yeah.
So parking for the park would be allowed
Yes,
in this area. Back to the trail
it's
question, you probably are aware that the plans for the park to date do call for an accessible trail that's been roughly located kind of along the edge of the 5-acre and then going across the bridge here and connecting over to Blythe Park. And I can bring the plans that the Parks Department has put together for those when we get into a more detailed discussion of that. And that accessible trail, that'd be an ADA accessible trail, so probably a hard surface.
Yeah, and if the trails are outside of the buffer, which most of that area would be outside of any required buffer from the river, would be allowed for sure. So I think it's a little bit more restrictive when you're dealing with trails that are within the buffer too, and then they start paying more attention to pervious and impervious surfaces and the like.
Yeah, but there are some restrictions that go along with the grants also.
With the
Right.
grant?
Yeah.
Ah, okay, well, there you go.
And when you say the buffer, are you talking about the first 100 feet from the high water?
Well, it depends. So we have different buffers required in the different environment designations, and those were established back in 2012 or earlier when we were looking specifically at what the existing conditions were and then what was an appropriate buffer based on that existing condition. So for example, like in the urban conservancy environment, the typical buffer is 100 feet. In the natural environment, it's 150 feet. And then there's the buffer system's a little bit complex because the city was trying to do what the Shoreline Management Act wants, is to recognize existing conditions, but also to protect the natural environment. So we've got kind of a tiered strategy for developing what an appropriate buffer is depending on what type of development it is. If it's a new development versus a repair or a redevelopment, those types of things. So we could look specifically at a proposed use in a proposed area, and then we could kind of go through our little flow chart and figure out what the buffer would be in that particular instance.
How far along is the planning on the park? And I understand there's going to be a more major public involvement, but you talk about some preliminary planning that's going on?
Well, there was some public meetings to solicit ideas from the public about what the community would like to see there. And other than that, the planning has mostly been around the fundraising to acquire it, and then whatever conditions come with some of those funds, like accessible trails and that sort of thing. So and restrictions on uses. So outside of that 5 acres, the rest of the back 9 will only passive recreation uses will be allowed. But that's it. The Parks Department was careful to say that there hasn't been a true master plan done for the site.
That's what I understand, that's coming. The
Yes.
master plan is coming. And is that next year or?
We don't have a date yet.
Okay.
I had a couple of questions. So access to the water, for example, if you wanted to launch your kayak,
Yes.
is that an active use or is that a passive use?
If you're for kayak launches and non-motorized boating, then I think that would fall within passive. That would be the type of use that would require more than just city permitting, but it would definitely fall within the realm of a use that's appropriate in a public park setting.
Okay. And then the next one was regarding the park. So we also have Blythe Park that's in this area, and it's not designated as a high activity or a high impact park. So what's the difference? Because there's some areas where the park at Bothell Landing where we got, for example, Horse Creek coming in, where that's not high impact. So we might have to take a closer look and understand where this high activity park comes from, because we don't have it for Blythe Park.
Yeah, and let's see,
Was there actually a designation for high activity park?
it's a classification under high intensity. So it's not a true environment designation, but in the use matrix, we teased out those very active park areas. And we stuck with, I think we were careful to stick where we could with parcels and not try and like split individual parcels up into all these different areas. So, yes, so we do have the high-intensity park, and that had like the playgrounds and a lot more active use. I think there's the amphitheater and those types of uses fell within that high-intensity park. And there's not very much or a very wide or functional buffer between those uses and the park. Comparatively, I think Blythe Park, there's a lot more natural vegetation in between the playground area and the trail and the water's edge.
Yeah, that's why I pulled this up. So the active uses in Blythe Park are outside of the shoreline jurisdiction for the most part, whereas there are a lot of very active uses, including the amphitheater within the shoreline jurisdiction of the park at Bothell Landing. So I think that was the thinking there.
Yeah.
Would it make sense to break Horse Creek out of there, though? Because
Yeah, now that it's been restored, and because it was in a pipe before within shoreline
it wasn't even in
jurisdiction.
the same location.
Yeah, and it was over.
Well, actually,
I think that's the other point, is that the moving of the Horse Creek and the daylighting was not really part of that master program.
part of which master program? Oh, the last update?
Yeah,
Right.
right, the last
Right.
update.
We didn't
Yeah.
have plans or,
No, it was
it was
not,
just like wouldn't it be great if we could restore Horse Creek, I think, mostly at that time. I think it was in the restoration plan document, the sort of list of preferred or ideal or desired projects. I think that was kind of on that list, but that's as much as we knew about it at the time.
Well, I
So-
think, like a decade ago, I think I commented on that to the city council, or someone at a meeting, I got an answer that it wasn't feasible due to temperature problems. And
Interesting. I don't know.
Well,
it clearly
just to
happened.
be clear though, okay, this is where, so Horse Creek within the shoreline jurisdiction was
Yes.
open air previously. So there was an open channel up to the old 522
And then it was piped.
in this location. So now it's been moved over here. Part of that open channel still exists up to 180th. But at that time, there was an open channel for Horse Creek, and it was designated as high-intensity park. Now the open channel is over here. So that's actually a interesting question that we hadn't really tackled. That could be considered a change situation that would justify at least considering whether there should be a change in jurisdiction for that portion, but we can look at that.
is that bold sticking out also because of the former Horse Creek?
I'm assuming so, but I'm not
Yeah.
certain, but
I can't
that's about where it
recall
was.
Yeah,
It came up this way, and yeah.
yeah.
Not because of a bump in the river.
No, yeah. So that kind of segues us nicely to the backside of that aerial photo, because Horse Creek is one of the areas that also popped up when we were thinking about areas where there are changed circumstances. Originally, we were thinking that whether that change actually changes the boundary of shoreline jurisdiction, because the jurisdiction is measured off of the ordinary high water mark of the shoreline water body. And depending on how they designed that and the local topography, the shoreline of the Sammamish River, the ordinary high water mark of it, might actually go upstream some distance, and I don't know how far that is. And then you would project the 200 feet from that, in which case it might get to the highway or it might cross over the highway, depending on how far upstream it went. So that was one thing we were wondering about, if we needed to fix the jurisdiction boundary, and then what environment designation might go on those lands that were suddenly within shoreline jurisdiction. And I had a conversation today with the Department of Ecology project manager who's leading this project from the ecology side of thing, and her suggestion was that we reference and utilize the provision in the RCW which states that if a restoration project changes shoreline jurisdiction such that it brings in additional properties or affects existing or proposed development that was previously outside of shoreline jurisdiction, that the city or the local jurisdiction could grant relief from the Shoreline Master Program standards. And generally speaking, and this is true even with this map as we have it now, this map is just sort of a best representation of shoreline jurisdiction. We haven't actually delineated the ordinary high water mark of the Sammamish River and then drawn our 200 feet. And we haven't actually delineated the wetlands to figure out, I mean, it looks like we have. Those are quite specific little zigzag lines in some areas that represent wetlands. So her idea was that if an applicant, say on the other side of the highway, were to propose something at that time, and as part of their proposal, they would need to determine with a site-specific study whether or not they were in shoreline jurisdiction, which would require them to figure out where is the ordinary high water mark of the Sammamish River. Then what does that do to jurisdiction on their property? And then if it is encompassing their property and it causes some kind of an issue for the proposed development, that they would, with their application to the city, request that they be granted relief from the Shoreline Master Program. So that's one option. And then the other, of course, is to sort of do more site-specific studies, figure out where is the ordinary high water mark. It would be, she said, a little bit more than a periodic review. We would need to characterize the existing, a little bit like what we did 6-8 years ago. Prepare an analysis, justify the environment designation, and so on and so forth. So not within the scope of our current study, but those are kind of the ends of the spectrum on how we could handle that.
I feel like it's probably not within the scope of what you've been assigned, but I think
Right.
it's within the scope of what ecology is asking for from the city for change conditions. I'd prefer to see the map updated, because for one, I don't think it's going to be a big difference. The creek's fairly steep. It rises pretty quick, so I don't think it's going to extend
Across.
the high water
would
mark
be nice.
very far up.
Yeah.
And so that being the case, it's really, I think it's going to only affect city property. And then I'd like to see it
easy.
change.
Okay.
Second, supposing it did cross the road, it puts the duty on an applicant across the street to point it out to us when we could just solve it while we're convened and change it there. Or if we did care about it over there, which I don't think we would on the other side of the highway, in application, I don't think a project coming into the city that's not in where it's mapped, I don't think
City would know.
no one's going to ask them to prove that they're not in
Right.
it because that's not where the color is.
Right.
So it's going to glide through anyways.
And I asked
whether
her
or not
about
it's-
that exact issue. I'm like, well, how are people going to know, what's the process? And if staff turnover and just familiarity with shoreline regs in general. And she said one of her suggestions was to kind of memorialize it in some way, that the change in, as part of the periodic update, maybe in the comprehensive plan, there would be some reference to that. So there would at least be a few spots where staff or applicants would kind of get the heads up, and it wouldn't just completely fall through the cracks. So those were some of her thoughts.
In practice, I think the way to memorialize it is in the shoreline
doing
master
it.
plan.
So it's probably a city staff question now.
Yeah, well, what we can do for starters is we can go back to our capital group and determine exactly what they did with the Horse Creek project and make sure that this mapping incorporates that. This highly defined boundary here was delineated as part of the 522 realignment. So we do know that
Real boundary.
is relatively up to date. Although I don't know, it doesn't show here, but there were some questions about whether it's been registered properly in our GIS. And then there's other little funky things like this little remnant that appear to be a mapping error of some sort. Wetlands don't usually take that sort of shape, but
Isn't that rather steep in there also?
it is, yes.
That's what I thought.
It basically, there's a bit of a plateau here where the old Bothell ski and bike and other businesses were, and then it drops off fairly steeply all along this area.
And another thing that Misty had mentioned too, while we're on the subject of she asked when that project had been implemented, and I think it was completed in early 2015. I think that was when they had the ribbon cutting ceremony and all that sort of thing for Horse Creek above there. And she said, well, it's a dynamic system, and how it was designed, it might not be done sort of evolving, and what we come up with as ordinary high water mark today, again, within X number of years, it's always going to be changing to some degree and dynamic. Same thing with wetland boundaries, depending on what's happening with upland development and where stormwater is directed, those types of things. It's all going to be a little bit subject to site-specific verification by an applicant. Although ideally, you wouldn't be going onto somebody else's property to go do that, which is what would happen in this scenario.
I guess the other, something of an anomaly, so here's the 200-foot line here. So there is a bump out there that appears to be related to Horse Creek. It could have been related to a previous wetland area, but anyway, we do need to take a closer look at the data that we have for that area and make sure that the map reflects what we have, and then we can come back with a recommendation of whether we need to do additional work.
And consider the designation question, which was whether it seems maybe more appropriate that it be Urban Conservancy west of that parking lot, continuous with the Urban Conservancy as it continues southward and around, versus High Intensity Park. But
and again, we followed it property line that was and is still there, and we need to coordinate with Parks Department on any changes there.
Does the new Sammamish River side channel move the boundaries?
I don't think so, but let's see. Let's take a look. That's this line. So the associated wetlands are here. The side channel itself, I don't believe is considered a water of the state, even though it's a side channel of the Sammamish River, but that's certainly a good question. So it connects to the previous sort of dead-end side channel here. And maybe I should just zoom out a little bit. And then back to the main river here. So it's basically...
Is that year-round flow?
Yeah, that was newly constructed, and they did the ribbon cutting for that about 6 months ago.
I didn't realize that. My guess, and we need to look at this more carefully, there's a bunch of guidance in Department of Ecology's website about when you create things like for water treatment plants or dams, bypasses and that sort of thing, and this seems like a much softer, more restorative sort of a change. But if there's water flowing through there and it's part of the Sammamish River, then I think, I would have to verify this, but the shoreline jurisdiction might be 200 feet off of that.
Yeah, that was put in to be rearing habitat for salmon.
Oh, okay.
So it's intended to be
that would
a functional
definitely
part of the
be
river.
a case where granting relief to all those folks up there, depending on how far the 200 feet goes on the east side of Riverside.
I think that's mostly going to be parkland. I'm returning on the parks layer now. And I also wanted to point out to everybody here that this is our online interactive map. You all have access to this COP map, and I can distribute the links or the path to that. But it gets a little muddy here. We've got probably too many layers, but you can still see the side channel here, and this is all parkland up through the green. So the brighter green here is along the West Riverside trail, bike trail. So the parkland basically goes up to West Riverside, and then the first private development is Riverside Landing here, which is clearly more than 200 feet from the side channel. So,
What about like further, like what is that, a chateau at Bothell Landing or any of those residential properties there? Will those be within 200 feet?
I don't think they'll be within 200 feet of the
Okay.
side channel, but
Okay.
we'll take a
see.
closer look at
Yeah.
that. And in any case, if it should be measured from that side channel, then we should change the mapping there.
Yep. Okay.
I'm going to turn off the parks again. So. Anything else on the mapping front? That was a good discussion because it brought up a couple of other aspects of that we haven't been discussing or
So
considering.
you made a comment on the marina, that's not an ecology designation, so
Right.
can you just lead us through why we have our little marina on the map?
Because it was a very unique area, and we established some very specific regulations governing that environment designation based on its unique existing condition. I think it's the only really significant water-dependent use on Bothell's shoreline. I mean, aside from like residential docks and those types of things, but it wasn't similar enough to high intensity or similar enough to any of the other designations that regulations we were crafting, like buffers and the use matrix and what's allowed and not allowed. It just didn't provide a really good fit. And so normally we were generally lumpers and not trying to tease apart the shoreline jurisdiction into parcel by parcel designations, but that particular use just seemed to warrant it based on how unique it was in Bothell's
But
jurisdiction.
we're not planning on revising, there's no need
I
to
don't
revise it.
think so. Not if it's still a marina and the people still plan for it to remain a marina.
So this is down at the west end of the Wayne Golf Course, and there's some other weird little anomalies, these two little bits of shoreline residential, which are residential lots, or there's a house on this one, and this is just a lot that extends across the Kenmore-Bothell city line into our shoreline designation. But those are all, there haven't really been any changes in the circumstances there. That's just how it is, the lay of the land. So the next section of the, if there aren't any other questions on the mapping part, gets into the Department of Ecology's checklist for periodic reviews. And I'll pull that up on the screen and let Amy walk you through that. And if you want a pointer, there's a laser pointer.
Great. So does everybody have the right document? You've got two checklists. There's a critical areas checklist, and then there's the periodic review checklist. And we're going to go through the periodic review one first because it's very shoreline specific. So everyone has that up. And then with that document, there's also a periodic review checklist guidance piece that Department of Ecology prepared, and it just has a lot more background information, suggested language that Department of Ecology provided, and sort of things to think about when it comes to how you want to address the particular potential change that ecology is identified in their table. Okay, so if we just want to go through these one by one, it seems like that might work the best. So the first one relates to the changing threshold for a substantial development permit. Once upon a time it was 5,000, then it went to 5,718 when we did the update. And now it's at 7,000, and I'm sure it'll continue to rise over the years. I think it's every 5 years that they're required to revisit that number based on Office of Financial Management numbers and things like that. So options we have here, and this is a little bit of a global question, is whether or not you want to just go ahead and update the dollar amount specifically in the code, or instead of listing out all the different exemptions, replace that long section with a reference to Washington's administrative code, in which case whenever that code changes, then automatically your SMP would sort of be caught up to that. Because right now, if folks were looking at the SMP, and this is a minor example, but they would see 5,718 and not necessarily know that the Department of Ecology has made a change. So that's one solution, but it does mean, though, that for many of the exemptions that don't change, that everybody's going to have to go to the WAC and look and find out if their development is exempt, or staff will have to do the same thing. But it avoids the problem of being behind. So that's sort of the question with that particular one. Whether or not you want to continue listing out in detail the exemptions, that's one of them, or just make the updates and know that you'll maybe be playing catch up in future updates as little things get changed.
Is it an option to leave the static ones in place and then at the specific where you get to the cost, then refer to the WAC?
Yeah, and it kind of does that already to some degree, where it references that this number will be updated every 5 years based on blah, blah, blah. Another thing that you could do too, I think, is a more, just ahead of all the exemptions, is just make sure there's a clear note to applicants, to staff. Please verify that this is the same language as is currently in WAC 173-27040 or whatever it is. So you could kind of do both, but you just want to, it's nice that folks can either read something and know it's right, or go to the place where it actually is right at the WAC, so.
I was kind of thinking it'd be nice to keep a reference to what the number was in 2018, just to give the ballpark, because people want to know what the ballpark is without having to go to the WAC. Let's say this was the value in 2018, go check the WAC for later updates.
For a later one.
I like that option. You know, I'm not a fan of making someone flip to another set of regulations to find what they're looking for, but I don't want, you know, I know a lot of people would look at something and they're going to read that number and think that's the number they're dealing with, and maybe they're underneath the actual level, you know.
Right. Okay. So just say, like, in 2018, this number will continue to be updated, you know, whatever
Yeah,
it says
please see
now, but
WAC.
just segue it better into the, please see the WAC.
But
Okay.
leave the other ones that are static there,
Yeah.
so we have it in our one-stop place.
Okay. All right. Okay. And then I noticed a typo in that. This is review the reference statutes. David, there should be a T there. So shame on me. The next one then is, again, this is sort of a WAC reference thing, but ecology has tweaked their definition of development, which is a very critical definition in Shoreline Master Program land, where they have specifically clarified that dismantling or removing existing structures is not development. So if you had a playground or a gazebo or something and you removed it, you don't need to get a shoreline permit or even a shoreline exemption to remove that. So we could, again, add this additional clarification to the definition. It may also be useful, not replace it and just say, see the WAC, but be really clear that folks should check probably all definitions, or many definitions anyway, with one of these two WACs, so that it's automatically sort of caught up in the master program. So it would still put a little bit of burden on staff and applicants, but not as much, and then they would still get the gist of the definition, at least with what's in the SMP. Thoughts on that?
I would be similar to what you said before. I would include the definition. It doesn't strike me that this is a definition that's going to be wildly changed in the coming years.
Just a clarification. Right, I don't think so either.
This was truly a clarification.
Yeah. And many of the things we'll talk about are kind of these little details and
Yeah, so
clarifications.
I think we have less worry about the future on this one.
On this one, yeah. So add it in. Okay, and I think I was just looking at the definitions section of the SMP, and I think it just launches right into them and doesn't kind of have a leading statement about, you know, many of these definitions are from RCW or WAC, you know, please refer, or maybe that's not a good thing to put on applicants. Maybe that's just a note for staff. Staff maybe always does that, but that's another thought. Okay. Okay, so the next one has to do with rules clarifying what activities are not subject to any sort of shoreline jurisdictional review or authority. And basically, the new exceptions are certain remedial actions, so like hazardous waste cleanup type of things, brownfields, those types of things wouldn't be subject to the Shoreline Master Program. Boatyard improvements, and kind of curious if that would apply at all to the marina. I think that has to do with maybe NPDES requirements for pollutants and management of those, specifically at boatyards, and then WashDOT facility improvements. And this might be a bigger deal in the city of Bothell since you have lots of facilities, WashDOT facilities. But ecology is provided in that guidance document I referred to, some example language options that you can think about.
I guess I'm a little confused reading it. Is it correct that it's saying that while you might not be subject to the shoreline regulations, or you might not need a permit, you still have to meet the intent?
Let's look at the actual stuff here. I think it's saying that you're not subject to the SMP, like, period. Let me look, though. Exceptions to local review. It says that requirements to obtain a permit, letter of exemption, or other review under the Shoreline Master Program does not apply. So that's pretty all-encompassing. Yeah, so it's not just, you don't have to get a permit, but you don't have to get any kind of review.
I'm just confused by the statement, whether or not a permit or other form of authorization is required. You still must meet the intent.
I'm sorry, where are you reading that?
Up at the top, after the first quotation mark, second line, all proposed uses, activities, or development occurring within a shoreline jurisdiction must conform to the intent and requirements.
Yeah. So that's what your SMP currently says. So this is kind of providing, adding an out for these specific uses. And if you're looking at your guidance document, it's on page 3 is where they kind of start explaining and discussing and providing some example language that could be incorporated into the SMP. Where it's just basically stating those exact things, that development's not required to obtain shoreline permits or local reviews. And then it lists remedial actions, boatyard improvements to meet NPDES permit requirements, WashDOT facility maintenance and safety improvements, etc.
What do they mean by WashDOT facility improvements? Is that roads?
Says projects and activities meeting conditions of RCW, such and
I mean,
such.
this says remedial actions.
Yeah, so that's another, so there's several categories of things. So remedial actions is one. So
And then
anybody,
boatyard improvements. And WashDOT facility improvements. What
Right.
is a WashDOT facility? Is that a road?
I think so. I think
Yeah.
it's anything that's managed and developed and operated by WashDOT.
So it would be the road,
522.
any
I mean,
drainage
I can see
facilities
stormwater
associated with it. Yeah,
improvements,
stormwater.
but-
Yeah.
Yeah,
But they are exempting all of the WashDOT roads? That
from needing a shoreline permit, so they'd still have to comply with any of the other state and local laws and regulations that might apply. But they're just saying you don't need to go through a
That seems to me to be an
permit.
awfully broad exemption if you're
Yeah.
talking about a road that in a shoreline.
Yeah,
It's probably out of our control if it's been
Yeah.
added to the
Well, I
state
would think
changes.
so, but I just
Right.
didn't know what it meant.
Yeah, no, I understand.
I would think if they said facility, they would say road.
Yeah, it leaves me questioning, what about their staging areas? Can they
Well,
be a staging
yeah,
area for a
exactly,
construction
that
project?
is
Probably.
That
If
that
it's
was
a-
my first
that's a
thought.
WashDOT
Yeah.
facility. I can look and see if I can find anything that
would- yeah.
defines that
Even
better.
remedial actions, I know
Yeah.
under CERCLA often they're exempted from
Yeah.
the specific rules of underlying, local regulations, but they still have to meet the
Yeah.
intent usually.
Yeah, something strikes me a little bit strange.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. I don't think we can change it, but I think we could understand it.
Yeah.
Would be helpful. Okay. The next one is kind of a procedural change, and it's not really optional. So it just defines that instead of when you submit a permit application, the clock doesn't start. Instead of starting when you send it to Department of Ecology, it starts when they receive it. And then that's the point where different time periods are clocked from. So I say we do that. The next one, if there's no questions on that, relates to forestry regulations. And I think this is basically a clarification. We have very few regulations, like one sentence in the master program about forestry. And this would just be a new addition to that that just says that forest practices, to the extent you even have them, that only involve timber cutting is not a development under Shoreline Management Act and does not require a permit or an exemption. But if you were to undertake timber removal and it was in a preparation for building a new condominium or something like that, then that would be considered a development under the Shoreline Master Program.
But a forest practice, as in I want to clear my lot of trees to
Right.
commercially wouldn't, because I think we do at 1307-010 prohibit forestry in some,
Right.
forest harvest in some
Right.
things. So would that be negating that?
So and that's like, I think this is commercial. So non-commercial forest practice are addressed in the use matrix with only a single sentence in the forestry regulation, that you have to meet all local, state, and federal regulations.
So what about a commercial one?
Yeah, but I don't think we have, I think the city doesn't have any commercial forestry in shoreline jurisdiction. I think that's kind of why we didn't spend a lot of time developing regulations for that, because it didn't exist.
I think we do have something in there.
Yeah, I think we have one sentence. Trying to see what page that's on. Here we go. Forestry. Yep, well, it's on my page 78, but it just says forest practice applications shall meet all local, state, and federal regulations regarding forest practices and land clearing and ensure no net loss of ecological functions.
So that's on the table also in page 3 of attachment 3.
Yeah, that's a better reference.
Is that an area where we would need to make a change to be consistent, or it's optional?
I think it's sort of optional. If we don't anticipate you're gonna have timber cutting in shoreline jurisdiction, it's not in support of a development. I don't know that you have any, I think it would have to be, what, more than 5,000 board feet to even trigger a forest practices permit of any kind.
It's just, it might, if we're stuck with that, but I think I have it on attachment 2, page 2.
Attachment 2.
It's natural environment. Commercial forestry is prohibited.
Yep. Let's see, where else do we have it? Use matrix. Yeah.
But that's just the natural environment.
Right, but I'm saying, I guess can we have that requirement? Can we say it's prohibited if the state is saying that if it's strictly timber harvest, it can't be, it's not under our jurisdiction?
Right.
I'm for the prohibition in the natural environment.
But the state, is the state language forest practices shall meet all local, state, and federal regulations?
That's what the current SMP
That's
says.
what our,
State
no, that's,
language?
no.
That
That's-
doesn't say it.
That's-
That just says if there's a local regulation, then it has to meet it.
But you're saying that's not the state's, that's our language, right?
Yeah.
Right.
That's Bothell's
Yeah,
language.
that's what Bothell says now.
Well, so what is the state's language?
The suggested one is in the next column over.
Basically, essentially, the commercial forest practice is not even subject to the master program.
And we need your microphone.
Am I, excuse me? I just want to make, I thought I had this straight, and then I thought, maybe I did not understand it. So this is the state language.
The suggested language we're discussing. The other column is.
But the state did not, they didn't change it, though.
This is one of their clarifications in the forestry regulations, just to be clear that commercial timber harvest that is not a development if it is like a standalone activity. If you're just harvesting timber and you're logging, those types of things, and it's not just that you're clearing in preparation for a shoreline allowed.
All I'm asking is, this is suggested language. It is
In the-
not the there's nothing that was changed in the ecology recent wax. What was actually changed in
Yes.
the wax
So-
that promoted this?
In the first column, it explains what ecology's
It says
amendments are.
amended that.
In the second column is what our code says.
I
and the third column
understand
is
that,
the
but
suggest.
it just says language suggested by ecology. So this is the change.
But they're saying the change in the forestry use regulations exempt forestry from the Shoreline Management Act.
I think they were always exempted. I think they're just clarifying it and wanting folks to be clear in their regulations that that's the case.
Okay, so can we say the Shoreline Master Program does not prohibit logging, but Bothell's tree ordinance does? So that it's transparent that you're not supposed to cut trees in that zone. So even if this board doesn't have the authority to ban it because the state says you don't need a shoreline development permit, we could refer them to another section of Bothell Code that says you can't do that.
Okay.
I'm not sure if I can add anything to this, but I'm going to try. So I think it's important that we keep in mind there's a distinction here between commercial and non-commercial. And the way I'm reading this, and we can look into this a little bit more and get some clarification, but the way I'm reading it and would interpret it is saying that if it's a commercial forestry practice, then it's going to be subject to, I think, the state regulation, in which case they're going to regulate everything that they're doing, whether it's in the shoreline or not. And what they're saying is that we can exempt that from our regulations because that's all going to be handled under the state. Is that a fair reading of that, Amy? Because we're talking about commercial in that case, not the non-commercial. Non-commercial would be someone who's coming in, clearing it for development, or just doing even cutting some timber, maybe for sale. So they might be exempt from the shoreline permit, but they wouldn't be exempt from our forest practices permit in that case.
Right, yeah, any other laws and codes in the city would apply, it just wouldn't require a shoreline permit. And, yeah, unless it was related to a shoreline development.
So I think we'll get some clarification on that, but
Yeah.
that's how I'm reading that. I think it's applying in a situation that most likely isn't going to apply in Bothell, because I'm not aware of any commercial
Yeah.
timber activity that we have in the city.
It says in the guidance document, there's a review considerations section. It says it's not necessary to amend local SMP forestry regulations to reflect this clarification. However, it could be helpful for jurisdictions with extensive commercial forestry, which is not the city, if questions about applicability of forest practices, laws, and rules arise frequently. So it seems like this is something we could just,
We could just leave
Move
it,
on.
just move on and make no change there.
yeah. Although, it's just thinking about it, it might be helpful to say in the SMP or in the use matrix that commercial forest practices are prohibited if that is the case, because we We very clearly say non-commercial forest practices in the use matrix, but not its corollary.
And I think that's something we have to take a closer look at and see where,
Yeah.
which designations, if we want to add that, where we would add that.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. The next one also doesn't really apply in Bothell. And this has been the case for a long time anyway, so I think it's just another one of those
That's
optional
good.
clarifications that the Shoreline Management Act doesn't apply to lands under exclusive federal jurisdiction. And the examples they give are like national parks or military bases. So we just said, this doesn't apply in Bothell and move on. Same thing with the next two sections, G and H. And this has to do, one of them has to do with the non-conforming use and development. And Bothell was a little bit ahead of its time in developing very specific local non-conforming use regulations. So I don't think we probably need to consider ecology's changes there unless there was some problem that's arisen at the staff level or implementation level that suggests maybe you do want to revisit it. Haven't heard that that's the case. Okay. Yeah, and then the next one just has to do with this periodic review process that we're doing and whether or not you want to put that in your SMP or not.
You're talking
And number H.
H. Okay.
Yep, on H.
keep
Yep.
tabs on where we are. So
Okay. Yeah, I. And this again is kind of probably more a staff thing, but there is an optional SMP amendment process where instead of you doing your process and then ecology doing theirs, you could kind of do it together. And I think the staff preference has been that you maintain your own process and then pass it to ecology. If you were to want to team or partner with ecology, you'd have to do that very early on in the process and so that they're partners really with you the whole entire way. And I think right now ecology's been and was in the last update very good at partnering to the extent and participating to the extent that the city wanted to and invited it. Okay, and then J, again, I don't think we need to make any changes to the SMP, just has to do with how you submit your proposed amendments to Department of Ecology. And I don't think that the city of Bothell's SMP speaks to that anyway. It's just it's what the WAC says, and that's how you do it.
Right.
Okay.
Let me just do a process check. So we are at our 90-minute period, which we've now ruled out a break, but unless we want to take a break because we are humans and we've been here for half the time, we're at the halfway point of the meeting. So does anyone want to take a quick break to use the restroom or get some water or something? And you want to take a break?
Thank you.
5-minute break, is that all right?
Sounds
All right,
good.
so we'll be on break for 5 minutes.
90-day target review.
Okay, cameras are back on, so we can go ahead and resume the meeting.
Okay. All right, so we're on 2016 updates, and the first one is just the fact that the legislature created a new permit exemption for retrofitting existing structures to comply with ADA. So I think that's fairly straightforward, and you already indicated earlier that you like the idea of having the actual exemption language in the body of the SMP, so we'll just go ahead and add that. The next one, if there's no questions, this relates to the wetland rating system. We just need to make a very minor tweak and reference 2014 instead of 2004. But as written already, it requires use of the 2014 rating system because it's 2004 or as amended, something to that effect. So we'll just go ahead and make it 2014, and that'll trickle through in a few other spots that we'll need to just change a few things to catch up to that. Very minor changes, and it wouldn't change buffers or any of those types of things. Any questions on 2016? Okay. 2015, this is kind of another administrative procedural thing no change is required here. It just relates to the 90-day target for review of WSDOT, so it's another special carve-out for WSDOT.
So it must be, if there's Washington that we need to know what they mean by facilities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And all this does is it provides a 90 review, like a target for review. It's not even a promise or, yeah. In 2014, the first one, again, this is kind of related to the exemptions and different cost thresholds. So this has to do with the exemption for docks, and that right now I think there's a limit of 10,000. This will change to 20,000. Yeah, I think that's what it is. Yep, changes to 20,000. So we'll just go ahead and make that change. And then B is a little bit more interesting. There's been a lot of you'll see lots of articles and lots of lawsuits relating to floating residences and overwater homes and that sort of thing. And the best we can figure out talking to staff is that City of Bothell does not have any legal floating homes, liveaboards, on-water residences, and we prohibit those currently. So I think we would just be able to add ecology's language, just being clear that the city prohibits floating residences of all sorts. It's mostly just a semantics word change where they, instead of using liveaboard, they use a broader term for floating on-water residence. Any questions there? Okay. 2012, no change required here. It just has to do with Shoreline Master Program appeal procedures. Same thing with the first one under 2011. Don't need to make any change. You already require use of the federal manual to delineate wetlands as opposed to the older ecology manual. Gooey duck aquaculture in B is not an issue in Bothell, so no change. Number C, again, is just related to being clear in the regulations how you're going to treat if you had any existing legal overwater floating residences. I think the recommendation is just to add those definitions just for clarity, and then again state that they're prohibited. And then we don't need to add any regulations addressing how any existing legal ones would be treated because you don't have any. And then D relates, I mentioned earlier that the city already did a really thorough job of developing special city-specific regulations for non-conforming existing uses. And so I think, again, unless there was some desire to make a change, that you could stay as you are.
Just a question for the
Yes.
city staff. It says unless we've had, adjustments based on the city's experience, have there been any issues that you're aware of?
I'm sorry. With
Non,
the-
what is- option to classify existing structures as conforming. So have you run into any problems with the current language in the SMP for existing structures?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'd want to check with other development review staff to make sure there's no issues there.
Okay. 2010, there's no changes needed from anything that happened in 2010. 2009, we talked about this a little bit. The Department of Ecology created new relief procedures. So if ordinary high water mark shifts as a result of a restoration project, then there's some sort of way out for those folks who are suddenly in jurisdiction and where it might impact their developments. I think their recommendation basically was to go ahead and add that language so it's clear. And particularly, it seems like we have several situations where that might be applicable, just to be clear to applicants that they have this option for requesting relief if they're suddenly in jurisdiction. And then 2009B, Ecology has adopted a rule for certifying wetland mitigation banks. So you already have flexibility to allow use of mitigation banks for wetland mitigation. Just a suggestion that didn't really come out of anything that Ecology suggested, but in the current language, it says that you could use a city-sponsored fee in lieu program, and I wasn't sure if it might be better to restate that so that it would be more clearly allow use of King County's in lieu fee program, the mitigation reserves program. And maybe that would be considered city-sponsored.
City approved?
City-approved or city, I'm not sure what the right language
I
is.
think if we were going to incorporate the county's fee and lieu program, we need to know what was involved in it. And the last time I knew about it, it was pretty complex.
It is fairly complex, and most of the complexity and the work involved would fall to the applicant who is proposing to use that in lieu fee program. It can be a lot less complex than having to design and permit and build your own mitigation, though. So it's very streamlined for applicants who use this. Setting up the mitigation reserves program or an in lieu fee program, if the city were to want to generate its own, that's very complex. It takes a lot of staff management and process.
We don't currently have one now.
Not your own, right?
Yeah, that raises some real questions in my mind, so.
So we can come back with more information about King
I
County's
put a
program.
big question mark.
Yeah, I'd like to have us look into that as well. There is some thought to using in lieu fees as a way to restore the Wayne Golf Course. So while you have reservations about it being misused, there are also possibilities to use it well.
Right.
So
And
I think it would be important for us to understand
ferret
it
it out a little
and
more, okay.
do the right thing.
One thing, the last time I spoke with the mitigation reserves people, they were still kind of on the lookout for sites that they could include in their program. So if Wayne Golf Course might be, depending on if the city was interested, they could work with King County's program and have that be I guess a receiving site for some of that. So there is potential there. And there might be other sites in the city as well. But right now, also the last time I spoke with them, they don't have too many actual projects that they're implementing that are within the area. A lot of their activity is down in the Cedar River or, points farther south. So at the moment, using that program might not make good ecological sense, but in the future, as they're working to find more sites, particularly in urban areas, then there may be more potential for this to be a really good option
Yeah, I think
for
it'd be
mitigation.
a good idea to make it, if we could suggest, an example being the King County one, but I'd want to keep the
Right,
city's approval.
exactly.
It
Yeah.
isn't just we can just do that because
Right,
I don't want to have an impact here that solves something in Tequila.
yeah. And Snohomish County could come up with one too. So you've got,
Right.
it would
Yeah,
maybe
we're
just
split.
be an example. They're just saying instead of city of Bothell sponsored, but city of Bothell approved or endorsed, or I don't know what the language would be, but
Right.
something.
Or other governing agency
Right.
with the city's approval.
Right,
review
and we don't need to
approval.
name King County's program in particular, but, okay. Okay. Okay, the next one is just sort of an optional language that could be added on moratoria in the city. They're not required to be an SMP, and I don't think we're recommending any change there. So that brings us to 2007, our last page. So this relates to how floodway is defined in the city. And there's, way back when, there's kind of two tracks. You could either just use FEMA's floodway, if it was any good, or if you had better local information and, you know, other sources of science that were more applicable to your jurisdiction, then you could sort of leave the door open for using that information to define your floodway. And the definition and the boundaries of floodway are important in shoreline jurisdiction definition, so it's kind of an important concept. Our conclusion there was that there's no need to make a change. However, there are a few little tweaks that we could make using some of ecology's clarification language that just might be helpful, particularly because you are behind a levee for the most part. The North Creek is, and to some degree, Sammamish River, that's protected from floodwaters by flood control devices maintained by or maintained under license from federal government, et cetera. So this could potentially be pretty important for applicants who are on the other side of the levees. Any questions
And that's
on
kind of
that
how
one?
we have it. I mean, right now in like
Yeah.
North Creek, it's restricted to the levees, right?
Right. I think so. Yeah, the levees or the floodways within there.
Despite the fact that
Yeah.
they're being eaten away at.
Yeah.
But
And this also, depending on what happens with FEMA's floodway mapping, and there can be battles with FEMA over how they map it. Like I know Kent had major issues where suddenly the entire city was floodplain or floodway. So this just maybe gives you a little bit more protection in case FEMA does something strange with its future mapping. This would allow you to kind of tighten it back up and put it back in between the banks of the levees.
would those two, would the added statement be at odds with, if the floodway means the area that's been established in effective federal emergency management agency flood insurance rate maps? And then the next one says, is that saying unless
it
they
could-
jumps the
right.
boundary?
Yeah, maybe it needs to say unless or except when, so some sort of connection there would be helpful. Except,
Common practice these days is to remove levees to reconnect floodplains. So
that's
if we
highly
were to do that,
desirable.
you know, like I think Rye 8's recommended that there's a little sports field at the corner of 195th and 405 that, you know, removing the levee to let North Creek flow into
Yeah.
that. And then, you know, we might also look at removing the hard armoring at Wayne so that the Sammamish can do more interesting things there than it does in most places.
Okay, that would be great. Kind of like Redmond's done a bunch of work on their stretch of the Sammamish. That's pretty neat. So
David,
similar.
Would you repeat again the part on the Sammamish? Would you repeat again the part on the Sammamish River?
Okay, one of the things we've talked about is the possibility of removing the hard armoring on the Sammamish and allowing, you know, multiple side channels and, you know, channel braiding and things like that to occur.
That'd be awesome.
So that would potentially, you know, affect
The floodway.
the floodway and, you know,
Jurisdiction.
affect the ordinary high water marks
Right.
and things like that.
Yeah, all the more reason to make sure that relief provision is in here.
Yeah, and that we understand, you know, even if current conditions don't require anything, if we see potential changes, that we're, you know, getting out ahead of that as well. I don't think that property on North Creek is actually likely to get incorporated, because I think that'll more likely be a, you know, 10-story business center, office tower or something like
Right,
that.
yeah.
But,
I don't think they're gonna get any levy setbacks up there.
yeah, but there, you know, there is a plan saying, you know, if possible, this levee should come out and the creek should be allowed to spread out and form a new wetland.
Yeah,
So, it's a possible change that would be related to this point.
Yeah. I don't think it would interfere with this at all, or they would work well together. Okay, and then the last two items, again, kind of no change needed, was the conclusion. You already include in your shoreline master program a list of those water bodies that are shorelines. So that's not necessary to make a change there. And then lastly, we already have this language that added back in 2007 a fish habitat enhancement exemption. And your SMP contains that language, so you're good there. That concludes the checklist. As I mentioned earlier, if you want to dive deeper, and maybe it still doesn't go quite deep enough, but the 31-page periodic review checklist guidance document provides lots of little tidbits and recommended language and things to consider, then a little bit more about kind of the history of, or what was intended for the particular change. So those are good to review in tandem, I think.
And Amy, is it fair to say that what you've incorporated into the checklist table did include your review of the
Yes,
guidance
yes, so I
stuff?
did look at
Yeah,
this.
yeah. So that's potentially a little bit of extra homework for the board members if they would like to dive more deeply into that and double check, see if you see any additional things there to add. And similarly, the attachment 5, the critical areas checklist, I don't think we're going to try to delve into that tonight, but that's some background information for you to review. Our work will involve looking at some changes not only to Title 13 but to Title 14, our critical areas regulations. So that's what that is, what that one is about, and we'll get into that more deeply at a future meeting. That's also an issue that will require input from the Planning Commission because Title 14 is their purview, and we're still kind of working out exactly how that will work, if we're going to do a joint meeting or whether you'll make a recommendation and pass it on to the Planning Commission. Current thinking is we're going to try, we're hoping to do it in a joint meeting. I think that would be the most efficient use of time. And that's actually a good segue to the final attachment in tonight's packet that I wanted to go over with you quickly, at least, the public participation plan, or draft public participation plan. This is something that Lisa Greeter put together, but I'll make an attempt to walk us all through that, and Amy, feel free to jump in as needed. So it starts out with the introduction that includes the council's charge to the board, the limited role for this Shoreline Master Program update. Also, I should say that this is a requirement of our ecology grant that we got. So the $20,000 that we got from ecology in part is helping with developing and implementing this public participation plan. So after the intro, it goes into the goals of the plan, the public participation, and then lists under public participation opportunities, different means that we're reaching out to the public. Through the website, we've just started posting materials, including tonight's packet on the Shoreline Board webpage. These meetings are part of that public participation. We are videotaping. This is not being broadcast live. I didn't mention that at the start, but it will be available on our YouTube channel to review following the meeting, and then that'll include to the degree to which the Planning Commission, Parks and Recreation Board are involved in the process. City Council will eventually be involved, and so there'll be other opportunities for public input there. And we're planning to have an open house possibly in January and February, I would say, timeframe. And perhaps that open house would be associated with a joint meeting with Planning Commission and or Parks and Recreation Board. There's the list of the parties that we will email information to. Right now, we don't have any local stakeholders, but if anyone who attends the meeting and signs in with their email address can be added to that. And I'll just, for anyone who does check the YouTube of this, feel free to email me and request to be put on the list. And then at the back is a very rough kind of first shot at a timeline of our process. So marching us through really, and this calls for the Shoreline Board to wrap up its work in February of 2019. I'm not sure that it could spill over, but our consultant contract calls for 6 public meetings with the assistance of our consultants. So this is what we laid out to be consistent with that. Going to City Council in April, which would allow ample time if there are any issues that come up to get this all wrapped up by the end of June. So any questions on the public participation plan? Mike?
Assuming that the city council does get to its deliberations in April, would we not have that May meeting? And I ask that question because there is a conflict for me on that one, so.
Well, yeah,
That's
certainly
under optimistic conditions.
if council and this would really wrap up the Shoreline Board meetings in February, but
Yeah.
actually, why did we skip March?
Oh, it's up there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We're jogging back and forth. But in any case, this shows it wrapping up with the board in February, Planning Commission March, City Council in April. But I think there's a...
I think we had one scheduled for May.
Yeah, there's an outside chance that we would,
Yeah.
the Shoreline Board would need to meet in May, but it's more likely that we would ask Shoreline Board representatives to attend a council meeting
Yeah.
in May.
No,
And so it wouldn't need to be the whole board.
Just for clarification, our recommendations with the Planning Commission, is that their chance to review it, or are we submitting it to them and then their recommendation is to council?
The only part that needs to go through Planning Commission are the critical areas regs. Otherwise, the Title 13 amendments go directly from Shoreline Board to council.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that? Okay. So unless there is a strong desire to delve into the critical areas checklist, I think we're done with our part of the presentation.
So our next meeting, is it next week then?
No.
No.
Our
okay.
next
So
meeting-
this takes place for the other November meeting then?
Yeah, this is the November meeting. And the reason we did this is next Monday, the second Monday is Veterans Day. The city offices are closed, so our next meeting will be December 10th, the second Monday of December. And then we'll go with the second Mondays through the duration of the process.
Okay, so what should our expectation be for getting ready for December then? We'll get a packet sometime a week prior then? And
Yeah. So in the meantime, it would be good to peruse that critical areas checklist, because we will have a discussion about that then and maybe have some more concrete recommendations. I would like the Shoreline Board to have a chance to look at that ahead of it going to a joint meeting with the Planning Commission. And if we have other materials ready for you, more than a week in advance, we'll pass those on as well.
Yeah, that would always be helpful. The sooner we can get it, the sooner we can dive in.
Yeah.
I haven't been paying as close attention as some of the others have to the Wayne Golf Course process, but I would not want to get out in front of council previous decisions they made, or, having the awareness to the grants that we've got and the restrictions. So any further information that you can provide us, what council has already agreed to, or what limitations we have through the grants, would be good information to have.
And like I said, we've started discussion with Parks Department about Wayne Golf Course and how this our work will interact with that, and so I'll definitely work into. I'm waiting to hear back about a joint meeting with the park board, but ahead of that, we could invite park staff to come and walk us through what's been agreed to date.
Or we could have David give us a big presentation, right?
Yeah, actually, I think some of the negotiations aren't going to finish till January or February. So negotiations with the state, I think, are done, and those, have to dot the I's and cross the T's and that sort of thing. But there's also going to be a round of negotiations with the county, and those aren't scheduled to wrap up till early next year.
And mostly having to do with the 5 acres in the back 9.
Yeah, I think having to do with the back 9 as a whole, but the county is going to have conservation easements on those 5 acres for the foreseeable future. So the exact terms of that need to be negotiated, and then how the city gets out of those easements as funds become available to buy out the easements and convert it to active use.
So I think based on our initial discussions with park staff, it seems to me that the restrictions from the easements, the agreements that they're putting in place in the easements will probably be more restrictive in most cases than what we're looking at through the Shorelines program. So I think it would be helpful, as someone suggested, to maybe have park staff at this next meeting, particularly as you're going to be talking about draft map and code amendments. So any changes to the designations along Wayne Golf Course, I think they'll probably be far enough along at that point that we can have a pretty informed discussion and get some direction from this board in terms of what the designations should be in there. So we'll talk to park staff about that and get information for the next meeting.
Any other questions for staff? Is this, do you have anything else on the agenda, Dave? Is this
No,
pretty much
that's
just wrapping
it
up?
for the study session. Yeah.
I had sent a memo out,
Oh.
and I wanted to talk about that just briefly. I think, did you all see the email?
Actually, and I'm
I-
sorry, I forgot. It wasn't part of the presentation, but this is a good time. I'm passing out hard copy of the response that I sent to all of you and Ann's email that was sent on Friday that I got this morning.
So thank you for taking care of that, Dave. And I want to just say one quick thing about my email. I did try to, I thought we had signed in, and I tried to check it today, and it said we're having trouble signing you in. So I don't know if anyone else had trouble, but sometimes I have trouble with the double A's or the underline. So I don't know if that was what the problem was, so.
Did anyone else have trouble accessing your city email account?
No, I was able to today.
Okay,
No.
so Ann, we'll follow up with you and find out what's going on with that.
Good, please.
Thanks
I
for letting
didn't go to the help desk, it just was on the line.
Okay, and yeah, anytime you have trouble, please let us know, because we want to make sure that we get that
Yeah,
fixed.
okay, thank you. So I thought I was all set, and then this popped up. So, thank you, Dave, for responding. I think we're actually talking about the same thing. So when I look at your memo, when you say, to an opportunity for the Shoreline Board to consider recommendations to be included in the docket discussion. That's really what I was asking for, not to include it in this review right now.
Right.
So I
okay.
recognize that's very limited and very focused, but rather to have it as a docket discussion, possibly for 2019, if it's at all possible. So
Right.
I think we're on exactly the same line. Is that clear to the rest of you, the difference? Yeah. So,
And because there's a chance that your final recommendations to council will happen after the docket goes to council.
yeah, I understand.
We'll make sure to have a meeting prior to that where you can identify the issues you have identified to date that you'd and have a discussion among the whole board, and where there's a majority that wants to ask council to consider additional items in the
So that
docket.
was
Yeah,
what the
we'll do
reason that was the reason I brought it up now, was because as I remember, your docketing goes on in January and then adopted in February sometime.
If we're lucky, we get it. We start in January and adopt it in February. Yeah,
yeah.
that's the ideal. Yeah, that we
Yeah.
strive for.
So that's why I brought it up at this point, to see if there was any chance. And I should say that one of the reasons that I brought this up now was because, as we all know, there is a major task force under the governor's supervision that's going on. In fact, they will be meeting tomorrow, they says, in Puyallup. So one of the issues that's coming up as part of these task force recommendation is the issues that cover habitat. And as we know, the Sammamish River is a major migration corridor for Chinook. So that is the background as to why I suggested that this is something we might want to look at.
Any other questions for staff? So I just realized we have 3 Daves. So if anybody has a pet name they prefer, Dave, Davy, David, Davy Boy, I don't know. I say David and now everybody turns around and looks at me.
I guess I can't go by Dave.
And 2 DBs, so yeah. That. My mom called me Davy, but please don't.
Well, now it's stuck in my head.
Is there anything else for the good of the order? All right, then we will be adjourned.